call this special meeting of the Budget and Finance Committee meet to order at 6:02. And we don't need to call the roll, is that correct?
Correct. I will note those present.
All right, I just want to welcome everyone to the table, especially the newly elected village officials. And I also would like to thank everyone in advance for their time, their talents, and their cooperation. Has this meeting been publicly noticed?
Yes.
Okay, and then do we want to start with a little bit of an entree by Mr. Emanuelson?
Yes.
Good evening. Do I have the ability to share screen, Rebecca, yet?
Oh, let me make you a co-host.
Fabulous.
There you go. You're all set.
This is the first in what can be several sessions related to the long-range financial plan. The long-range financial plan is kind of the kickoff, believe it or not, of the 2022 budget cycle. And the reason it's a kickoff is because there's several things that this project implementation schedule, which we're going to review tonight, does. It impacts the long-range plan, which then impacts the 2022 budget. So the first one of those is, of course, the long-range financial plan really takes a look at the village's debt service requirements to implement the proposed project schedule. So we look at all the various project schedules, our reasonable estimates of costs. We figure out what kind of bonding requirements we're going to need to have, when we need to bond, and then ultimately there's some debt service that has to be incurred to pay that back. That rolls into our existing debt service, which is then part of the 2022 budget. You know, we also look at the village's overall debt capacity, which a few years ago was getting to be in a zone that some elected officials felt was a bit high. You know, those numbers have been coming down gradually here as we get through some of the major TID projects. TID 1 will be closing next year, so the rest of that debt's retired. And we've also pretty much got concluded ramping up the village's construction schedule from what we considered somewhat intermittent road maintenance to a full-blown road reconstruction program in the last 10 to 12 years. You know, previously the village issued very little debt for 30 years because they didn't do a lot that required debt service. You know, we prepared a schedule and kind of looked at the 40-year history of the village's capital projects, and we were just at a time where the village board didn't want to engage in those things. So when we start implementing major infrastructure projects, everything you do just keeps adding and adding and adding to the village's debt and the village's debt service. We're getting to a point now where we're starting to retire debt at about the same rate we're taking on new debt, at least in the general tax levy supported area. So our debt service needs have stabilized, although as we'll discuss at another time, you know, there was a pretty good spike a few years ago that we're still managing, and we call that our debt service stabilization initiative. And we'll get into that when we get into the long range plan and all the fiscal documents, and as well, we're going to get into the formal 2022 budget cycle. The other thing that the long range plan does is it really looks at the utilities, our water and sewer utility, and projects what our rates are going to need to be over the next 10-year period to be sustainable. And well, we know that sometimes our purchase water costs from Milwaukee will increase. That's our source of water for our water utility. Sometimes our treatment charges with MMSD, that's a source of our discharge for our sewer utility, will go up significantly. But also we have our infrastructure projects that, again, require capital investment. And then the utilities need to repay that investment through the ongoing debt service and those have to be covered by the utility rates. So, we need to take a look at that, trying to be as thoughtful and strategic as we can with how we manage our utility rates. Try to keep, if there's an upward trend, we try to keep that slow and steady. Just like staff always advocates for the general budget, we try to manage that to the best we can for our utility budgets, as to not to have as dramatic of an impact on our residents and our taxpayers in any particular period because we failed to plan accordingly. So that's all part of the outlook that the long range financial plan provides the village board at its onset. So I am going to share my screen. Hopefully we can see that. Yes. Yes, okay. So this is the project schedule that feeds into all those debt service needs. So it's a project implementation schedule. It is have various cost estimates. The closer a project is to being constructed, the more refined those estimates can be. Ultimately, we do preliminary engineering and we start getting to engineering estimates that are their best approximation of the project cost based on what they feel the current market conditions are. Ultimately, we get to project bids, and that tells us what the market really is going to bid for those projects. Now, the costs you'll see in this schedule are overall project costs. They're not just construction costs. They include the engineering costs. They include the construction costs. They include sometimes a construction inspection cost for making sure that the project's implemented according to engineering specifications. So as we go through later this year and next year, if you refer to the documents, you'll notice that those numbers will be different, and that's okay. The long range plan is best estimate, but also then when you get back to specific actions at the board, we're talking about just a component like the construction component will never be the full, hopefully will never be the full cost of the project. So in that regard, that's to be expected. We track that. Ultimately, when we start issuing bond documents, again, we take the latest and greatest information available to us and try to only borrow for the funds that we need to complete the projects in the time frame that we're bonding for.
Mark?
Yeah.
If I may interrupt, I would just like to say, if it's okay with you, can we take questions as we go here? Is that, I'd just like to see if that's kind of what would be, that would be my preference. I don't know how everybody else feels about that. Or if you feel strongly that it's best if you just complete, I just want everybody to feel like they can ask a question if they've got one.
Sure, this would be a great time for me to pause and see if there's any comments on that aspect of what the project schedule is going to lead into.
Okay, so I have a question about the street lighting LED. So I know you said that I believe these numbers I think it's on page 3, are pretty much all inclusive in engineering, project inspection, blah, blah, blah. But my question is, I believe when I spoke with you in an earlier discussion, we did talk about, and maybe with Leanne, once we get through a lot of the storm sewers and stuff, we do get to the street lighting. And I believe there's something there that is going to be really big, but it's not outlined. Under street lighting LED, it's only the fixtures that are in that 600,000. And I'm on page 3, I think I'm talking about line 9.
Sure, let me get
the understanding that that's a very small piece of that project, right?
Yeah, let me get through the introductions here of the document, and then we'll loop back on that when we talk about that specific project, if that's all right with you.
That's great. And then I can't, at this point, I'm not seeing, I'll try to see hands. And if I don't see them, Rebecca, will you please help me?
Great. And we'll get to that within just a couple of minutes here.
Thank you.
So the implementation schedule it's going to be on the next screen has to take into consideration several factors. One of the key factors is how much work can be done in any given year. It's a competitive sort of environment there, and that's where the board's prioritization, particularly over the past 3 years, has been very helpful. What projects are going to sit in what order, because we do not have unlimited capacity for staff. We don't have unlimited capacity in the community to dig up 3/4 of the community at any one time, as DPW projects quite often can do. And then there's the fiscal impact. Again, we want to try to manage this fiscally so that, again, that these projects will have on the greater budget. So that's kind of how that's kind of how this project schedule is presented. So I'm on page 3 here. We've got the general infrastructure projects. Those are projects that are generally independent of each other. Not completely, but generally. So lists all the various projects that we've got going on. Leanne will speak in a moment to how she views the implementation schedule, the even year, the odd year projects, and how we kind of work through that. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail here. We'll get to that when we do the long range plan review, when I put in all the other financial schedules. And then on the next page is what we have, the coordinated projects. Now, these are the big efforts in the Southeast Combined Sewer Program. So the roads work is a direct result of the sewer work, and the water work is a direct correlation to the sewer project and which areas are being constructed at any given time. So those all move in lockstep. So those are the big strokes on that. For the details, I will turn it over to Leanne, and we can start in at our first basic segment of the project implementation schedule, and that's the local road program. I think Wesley's got his hand up.
Go ahead, Trustee Warren.
Thank you. And I gotta say, I kind of accidentally clicked a little early, but I think this works well with a segue. Just Leanne, if you could, when you're talking specific. Of course. Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now. Go ahead.
Well, I made some really eloquent points before, so I can't repeat them.
You remember him, don't you?
So,
Hit a rewind. Oh, that's it. That's analog, isn't it?
so this kind of dovetails. Like it was kind of an accidental click. I think I jumped the gun a little bit, but this actually dovetails nicely. Leanne, I was wondering if you could discuss, when you're talking alley reconstruction. I can't remember exactly alley reconstruction in Oakland Avenue South. I thought we had one alley reconstruction in 2023, and I thought we moved Oakland Avenue South up, but we might, again, I'm going a little bit back in my memory banks. Maybe we decided I'm sure there's some reason we're not doing alleys in 2023, and Oakland Avenue South, was that something where we were just patching and repairing? So if you could just address those two in specific as you walk us through kind of this section, I would appreciate it.
Those are definitely points we'll discuss. Yep.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Okay. So I think just as a point of background related to the local road program, I think it's interesting to note that prior to 2005, the village did no long range planning related to street reconstruction or maintenance. They did occasional and periodic road programs, but those were never planned in advance. They were always determined at the point that funding was allocated, and then a plan was developed for which streets would be reconstructed. In 2005, then DPW Director Jim Bartnicki used an engineering consultant to actually develop a street reconstruction schedule. And And that laid out planned road reconstructions for approximately 20 or so years. In 2009, I asked for funding for a pavement management plan, which actually used that road reconstruction schedule. I would call it as one of the three components of the plan. So and that was adopted by the village board in 2009. That plan actually includes road reconstruction as one component, major road maintenance as a second component, and then alley reconstruction and maintenance as its third component. The plan envisioned that the village would do major infrastructure work in even calendar years and lesser infrastructure work in odd calendar years. That was both for planning capacity reasons, and then also for to give the village a long-term ability to actively plan and manage its infrastructure financial obligations. So that's important to note, because I would say up until next year, since its inception, that plan has really driven how we schedule all of our infrastructure work. Typically, the local roads program, which is another name for our road reconstruction program, drives the remainder of the infrastructure work that we do in any given year. The schedule identifies roadways that are candidates for reconstruction based on their pavement ratings. The pavement rating system is dictated by the Wisconsin Department of Transportation, and each community that receives transportation funding is required to submit to WISDOT pavement ratings for each block segment in the community. So we actually drive and rate every block in Shorewood every other year and assign it a 1 to 10 rating.
And so
those,
if I may, so that applies even to something that's not a state highway, like it applies to Larkin.
every local street, yep. So we then use those pavement ratings objectively to develop our approaches for both road maintenance and road reconstruction. Typically in what we call a worst first process. So, and I say that we've used that formula, so to speak, up to this year, because really beginning next year with MMSD's Edgewood Near Surface Collector, we're really taking a pause in that approach. A previous village board had identified a strong preference for completing our combined sewer improvements as quickly as possible. At one point, we had a four-phase program. We've reduced that to 2 and really front-loaded those 2 items in 22 and 23, which Trustee Warren explains why we're doing very little else in 2023. Because we have significant sewer projects in 22 and 23 that don't leave, frankly, residential will nor staff capacity to do much of anything else.
No, thanks, Lynn. Sorry to jump in. Yeah, I realized that I forgot the fact that we had loaded all the sewer projects.
Yeah.
I think I know the answer to my questions. I just got a little fixated on the chart as opposed to the underlying information.
That's quite all right. So staff anticipates that when we clear the deck on the combined sewer improvements, we will go back to the previous planning approach, which includes major infrastructure projects in even calendar years, which typically is our local road program. With every local road program, we also do a utility and other systems review. So we review the condition of water main, condition of sewer. We also have programs related to street light cabling replacements and ash management replacements. We also look at our urban forest as an infrastructure system that requires maintenance. So all of that is wrapped into any identification of local road reconstruction. So in odd calendar years, then we look at doing the lesser infrastructure programs. That includes roadway maintenance, typically a resurfacing, or what might also be referred to as a mill and overlay program. And then alley work. Alley work can either be alley reconstruction or it can be alley maintenance. We had our first significant alley reconstruction program in 2017. Another in 19, and then have one obviously again planned for this year. Those are also done based on pavement condition ratings. WSDOT does not require communities to rate nor submit ratings for alley pavements, but the village, we have done, DPW has typically done that because they're very useful for, you know, their intended purchase, which is to be able to objectively rate pavement condition and then assign a score and use those scores to develop a system for either reconstructing or major maintenance in certain cases. Typically,
Dan, I have a question. The alley plan, I thought were we supposed to get also a copy of a $500,000 funding level program schedule? I just see the 750,000.
Yeah. I have not prepared a $500,000 program. If it's the board's will and direction, we will certainly do that. Though comments in recent years have been for more alley work, not less. So we really focused on the $750,000 funding level. But again, if the board wishes to see a $500,000 plan, we can do that.
Well, I guess when we hear about, we're kind of maxed out in terms of staff and everything, I just wonder if it would be helpful to at least see what it would look like.
Sure. I mean, essentially you could, so we'll say, 2025 is shown as a double program because we are not doing a program in 2023 because of the Southeast Combined program. But for example, in 2027, this identifies 4 alleys. Essentially, you could remove a third of that program and that would get you, close to 50,000, or why do I keep doing that? $500,000. And then it would certainly push the program out for many more years than is shown here.
And I guess it would just be helpful to know, like, what are the pavement ratings, for the ones that would be pushed back 2 years, right?
Well, I mean, we can only report what the current ratings are. I have no method or means to project pavement ratings, so we do not do that.
Right, but what I'm saying is, like, for the area that's labeled purple for 2025 or 2025. So like on the scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being really good and 1 being really bad, I don't know, without driving around, you know what I'm saying?
Yep. I would say it's fair to assume that most of what you see colored on this map is certainly less than a 5, and probably the majority of them are 3 or less.
Okay, thank you. And I see Trustee Warren has his hand raised. Thank you.
Yeah, Leanne, I just wanted to ask, is this something where you feel like doubling up on the alleys? I'm sorry, I don't have the year in front of me, but it was 2025. Do you feel like doubling up in the alleys, does that stretch your resources thin, or is that something that you feel like DPW could handle? I mean, again, I'm kind of going to building on Kathy's point, whether we need to look at reducing that because you don't have capacity, because you feel like you'd be stretched too thin in order to effectively implement.
Sure. 2025 is ways away. It'll be here quick, but I would say if we're operating with the exact staff that we are operating now, this is going to be really difficult.
Does that include the person that we authorized the hiring, the construction manager person?
It does not. that's not how we're operating now. So basically, as we're operating now, it's Joel and I. Yeah, this would be really, really tough. Because we also have a number of other programs identified for 2025, which we'll address each of those as we work through all of these program explanations. But this was a directive of
every expectation of you having that extra person hired within the year, right?
I do not have that expectation, frankly. We made some efforts to do that. We had 2 candidates that appeared to be qualified. After the interview, it was clear that only one of those had qualifications that approached our job description. He was offered the position and he declined because we couldn't meet his salary request.
Okay, this is the first I've heard of it, so that's good information to have. Thank you.
Okay, we have talked about that.
Will you represent this job in a new form or to help with this sort of a situation? What's your strategy for dealing with the situation that we have now?
I think we would have to. I think we would have to have a larger conversation about the expectations of the position, how it was branded, how it was packaged, and whether the approved salary actually lined up with the job description. I think my personal opinion is that is the issue currently. The job description is quite broad, and it encompasses a lot of job responsibilities that range from extremely technical to relatively entry level, and that's tough. I mean that it's
right.
It needs some refinement.
It was like snow removal on nights and weekends, right?
That was not originally part of the job description. I don't have it in front of me, so I can't recall if that made it into the final.
Okay. President McCaig? I thought I saw your hand up. President McCaig, are you there?
You're on mute. You're muted.
The dreaded mute.
I think she sounds like she's having audio difficulties.
Yeah.
Okay, all right, then, well, let's see. President McCaig, can you hear us? Can we hear you? No? Okay, I'll have you go ahead then, and hopefully we'll come back to her then. Thank you, Leanne, for that clarification. President McCaig? Leanne, do you want to continue?
Sure. Mark, do you mind advancing the slide? Thank you. One of the other, what we would term lesser infrastructure projects that falls typically in our planned odd calendar years is the sidewalk program. Historically, we have worked through this with a division of the village into different geographical sections, and then do a complete evaluation of each public walkway within that section, and base that on the village board approved concrete condition criteria. If a particular piece of sidewalk or stone, as we refer to them, meets the conditions for either replacement or grinding, grinding eliminates trip hazards, then a notice of assessment is issued, and the work is completed by a contractor. At the end of the season, after the completion of work, the value of those improvements are then added to the tax roll, and the costs for those appear as a special assessment on the tax bill of the abutting property owner. As a matter of fact, we just sent out our notices of assessment for this year's program last week. I think they hit mailboxes probably Friday, Saturday, because we came into quite a few calls this morning. Typically, sidewalk programs are probably our highest customer contact programs. As you might imagine, anytime someone is making a direct payment for something, their attention level, their interest increases dramatically. And frankly, not all of those interactions are pleasant. But it is a very, very labor intensive program. Anytime someone calls with a question regarding an assessment, either Joel or I, most typically it's Joel, have to go out in the field and then verify the marking, have follow-up contacts with those residents. And it, like I said, it's quite a labor intensive program, and it really has an impact on our staff capacity to manage and address both other infrastructure programs and frankly on our day-to-day operations.
Can we try and see if President McCaig is connected now? I don't think she hears us. She's good.
Yeah,
I guess not. Okay, sorry. Please continue.
yeah, you could always text one of us the question, and we could ask, or text Rebecca the question, and she could ask the question.
Or call in.
Yeah. Okay, please continue, Director Butchlick.
So I believe in a recent long-range plan discussion, there was some consideration by the village board of moving this project from an assessed funding source into general fund. Ultimately, that was not approved, and we've continued under the assessment model for this year. As you'll note on the map, there is no program scheduled for 2023. That is really twofold. One is that the staff capacity issue. The other is you would see where the 2023 program would be. And, you know, it's possible that if we put that many contractors in one area of the village, it'll just slide right into the lake. I'm not sure. I don't want to test that theory, but that would be a lot to ask of the residents there, a lot of contractor coordination. It would just be very, very difficult. So our next sidewalk program after 2021 will be 2025 in the far southeast area of the village.
Okay, thank you, Leanne. I'm going to take a comment from Trustee Arndorfer and then President McCaig if she's able to. Trustee Arndorfer?
Yeah, I just wanted to see, is there any history or context you can provide about why we approach sidewalk repair the way we do via assessment versus general fund?
You know, I've been here for a while and I can't, the best answer I can give you is because that seems to be the way it's always been done. I can make, see, I'm stuttering even. I really can't give you a good explanation. Frankly, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me. And I do have a very hard time explaining to residents who ask that very same question. They're like, you don't assess me for my alley. Why do you assess me for a sidewalk? I don't use the sidewalk. I use my alley. I mean, that's a tough one.
And I have a question. So if we would change from the assessment model to the general levy, is that what we call it, a general levy funding situation? How would that change the replacement schedule?
At this point, unless the board gives alternate direction, I wouldn't propose any change to the replacement schedule. It certainly would take less follow-up time for staff, but any area bigger than this would still be a difficult thing to chew.
Okay, so we'd still be looking at the same time frame. The funding model would change, and so it would be added to the tax rolls. And for you as a department, it would require what, 1 or 2 notices saying we're coming to your block soon, and we'll mark your squares that will be changed, and we just want to let you know, here's a heads up.
Very likely. I think our communications probably would be quite similar to how we do them now, but rather than a, notice of assessment, AKA here's your bill, it would just be a communication piece that would inform them of work scheduled to occur in front of their property.
And I would think if we would decide to go with the levy versus the assessment, it'd be a way to make a clean break because of this time break. We have a 4-year time break, right? So, I mean, honestly, someone could say, wow, 2 years ago, I had to pay for my own sidewalk, but if I had just been in the right category 2 years later, I wouldn't have had to pay. I mean, I'm just saying,
Yeah,
the timing might be right to try this. But there's no going back. Trust me. Once we take it off of the special assessment, there's no going back, right? We're all agreed on that. President McKay? Nope, not yet. You can text. Go ahead.
Okay, your hand is still raised on the screen, which is why I think we keep calling on you.
Anyway, all right.
And then Manager Ewald has a comment, I think.
Okay. Rebecca. Manager Ewald.
While we were preparing for this meeting, and last week had some conversation about just the level of communication that the assessments generate when it comes to sidewalk. And it's been something that I've noted to others, I've found unique because our community has such a strong value in being pedestrian oriented. And so when people look at a sidewalk, they don't necessarily view it as a part of the public infrastructure. And today, when those assessment letters dropped, I was dismayed to learn about some of the very aggressive communication that some of our residents were having with the department relative to the letters that were sent. And at first, it gave me great pause because I would be all up in ears to hear about greater levels of civility that I think we could all have in terms of how we communicate. But I share that with you because a lot of times when we talk about project implementation, we're talking about what it takes when we hit the road for the construction. But it's pretty significant, challenging communication that we receive on this one specifically, and it's related on that topic. So because it was timely and because I was dismayed by hearing it again today, but I've heard it every time that this kind of comes up, just wanted to share it with you because it's a continued dialogue that we hear from and I think we need perhaps to consider a different approach in the future.
And so I'm assuming that the mailing that went out included a dollar number that they'll be billed for?
That's correct. Because it was a notice of anticipated assessment. By statute, we're required to inform them of the estimated cost or value of the improvement.
Okay, thank you.
Should we move on, Mark? Oh, he flipped the slide. Okay.
Trustee Rudolph has a comment too, I believe.
I just had a question about the communication to residents about the assessment. And I'm just not remembering from getting things myself, but is the first time somebody finds out about the assessment in that notice of assessment, or like how often are we communicating with people about, the fact that we've been assessing for these projects? I'm just, kind of trying to understand if there's any more proactive communication we could do to people to help limit at least somewhat the kinds of unfortunate contacts it sounds like our staff is getting?
The first direct contact that we have with a resident about a sidewalk replacement in front of their home does include the notice of assessment. Each year, we outline infrastructure programs in various communications. Shorewood Today, it is always on our website, the village manager's memo, and the information is always there. Like anyone could look and know on the map when they're up for walks, but we do not prior to a program mail everyone in the program area a letter that says the sidewalk program is in your area this year. You may receive an assessment. We have not done that.
And Trustee Arndorfer?
Thanks. Yeah, and I mean, just based on my recollection, I mean, are we working with a different vendor this time than we did the last time, and taking a somewhat different approach in terms of evaluating the respective slabs? Or sorry.
We're using the same engineering firm, which is our village consulting engineer. We are using criteria that were approved in 2019.
Okay.
They were modified from the criteria that were used the first time that year's area was evaluated. So
Okay.
I would say it is, what is the word I'm looking for? Less strict. That's 2 words. But we are using the modified criteria from 2019.
Okay, thank you.
And so I just would like to ask too, if we're still on sidewalks, you keep trying to turn the page and we keep bringing you back to sidewalks. So wasn't this the first time also 2019 that we tried the, what's the word, grading or?
The grinding?
Grinding, thank you.
Yes, yep. 2019 was the first incorporation of grinding into the program. That the intent of that work is to eliminate trip hazards. It was generally well received. It certainly has a purpose and a place.
And that happens throughout the village if you call in. Is that correct, or does it just happen in that area that's?
It targets the area, the program area for the year. If we are aware of other areas that have significant trip hazards that can be addressed by grinding, then we would very likely use that contractor to do work out of area when they're here. But I'm sorry?
Do we do any mudjacking?
We do not mudjack. We have not mudjacked for probably 20 years.
Okay, and I have President McCake's questions. First of all, she asked if we decide to quote unquote undouble the alleys for 2025, when do we need to decide that? I guess that's a question maybe for Mr. Emanuelson.
No, I think the dominating factor there is still going to be project coordination and design. So I don't know, I can't speak for Leanne, but at least the year before, right?
Yeah, I think we probably would ideally like.
Sorry.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear your question.
Would engineering be done the year before?
Yes. So ideally, we'd want to know, we'd want that answer by the end of 23.
And her next question is, if we want to move sidewalks to the tax levy, when and how do we do that? Is it separate from the budget?
Well, I'll interject here and just suggest that if the board wants to make a policy shift in that regard, that can be brought up sometime in 2022 or 2023 that gives staff new direction and then we will just budget accordingly. We will budget to fund the project through borrowed proceeds as opposed to relying on a portion of them being special assessed. So there's not a burning need to make that decision, but as with anything strategic, when we get to a point that the decision can be made, we welcome that conversation.
Can I ask a quick
Warren?
question? Yeah, and I apologize if this was already asked and answered. I had to run out very briefly. I think a bird might have flown into my window, but everything seems okay out there. So my question is this: what's the mix on? Is the model that's generally used the assessment model, or do most people fund it, or do most municipalities fund it off the tax levy? I'm kind of curious as to whether we would be conforming to the norm or whether we would be an outlier if we switched how we did this.
I believe Rebecca might have some information on that. Do you have any information on that, Leanne? I have not done a research in that regard.
I have not either. I can tell you that up to recent years, Whitefish Bay did assess for their walks. They no longer issue special assessments for any infrastructure work. Beyond that, I don't have information. We could certainly gather that.
Yeah, I think, well, I don't think we need to gather it tomorrow, but when we're making the decision. So are you saying that Bay is now funded by the tax levy? Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, thank you. And then I think whoever was trying to move us along to Oakland Avenue, unless there's any more further questions on the sidewalks, we can move on to page 9. Thank you.
So as you know, pavement condition on Oakland Avenue warrants some major attention. The segment south of Capitol Drive is scheduled to be resurfaced this summer. If I jump back to an earlier question or statement by Trustee Warren, that Oakland Avenue in particular was really segmented and inserted into open slots in the implementation schedule. Initially, MMSD was intending to begin its Edgewood near surface collector in 2022, or at least that is the schedule that was communicated to us. When they determined that schedule was going to be deferred by a year, we had a conversation at the board level about opportunities in 2021 for other projects and how we kind of work things around the MMSD project. And at that point, it was determined that a resurfacing of Edgewood south of Capitol Drive would be feasible, and that we did have time to do the engineering work for that. So that was included in, I believe it was in Mark last year's long range plan, or at least it was in the 2021, identified in the 2021 budget.
Yeah, that was a decision that was part of multiple discussions. I don't recall if that was in the original 2021-2030 long range plan or if it was based on subsequent information of MMSD schedule. And then as a follow-up to that, I mean, that's just the mill and overlay. The reconstruction based pavement work was then scheduled for, I believe, 2028, because the temporary mill and overlay would hopefully maintain that surface to allow us to loop back on that after the Southeast program, right?
Correct. Yeah, thank you. And that's important to note that the resurfacing of Oakland south of Capitol is intended as a temporary measure. It is not viewed as a long-term infrastructure improvement.
Trustee Warren, I see he has his hand raised.
Yeah, sorry, I think this builds on Mark and Leanne, your two last points. I was going to ask, and maybe this is the less obvious question. I apologize for the earlier question. Where this section I should have read closer. But I was wondering how long mill and overlays are intended to last. I thought it was only 5 to 7 years, but so in other words, I'm thinking, are we gonna need to have a conversation about moving up Oakland, or do we think we can get 10 years out of it?
Well, let me try and answer your first question first. How long they're intended to last? That really depends on the type of mill and overlay that you're doing and your intended purpose. On a typical asphalt street will have a design life of 60 years. That 60 years will generally include 2 complete mill and overlays at 20-year intervals. So when I say complete,
You're talking about a concrete street, right? As opposed to asphalt. The 60-year starts with a concrete roadbed, not asphalt, right?
no,
Oh,
I'll get to that, but I just, on an asphalt street, you would typically do a complete mill and overlay at a 20-year interval. Then you're removing more than just the top driving surface, and you're rebuilding the top part of the roadway. What we're talking about doing this year for Oakland Avenue is very different than that. That mill and overlay on an asphalt road is intended to last 20 years. What we're doing here is really only removing the very top driving surface and replacing it. And in that sense, I would say, I think a reasonable expectation of life is probably less than half of the 20 years. It's very difficult to speculate that. There are a multitude of variables and contributing conditions that could change that number. What we're doing on Oakland Avenue is actually removing the driving surface of a concrete street and replacing it with an asphalt driving surface. Typically, those don't visually wear as well. You get what's called reflective cracking. So every area that you have a joint in a concrete pavement, within a short period of time, that period of time could be months, it could be a year, it could be 18 months, but you will eventually see that joint reflect back up through the asphalt, and it will appear as a crack in the asphalt.
so I have a question on, if I'm looking at the right document on page 3, number 5, Oakland Avenue South. I don't see anything until 2030. Are we taking this out of cash flow and not bonding? So
Now,
it's
the village only bonds for the 2 years directly in front of them. So when we get into the 2029 and 2030 timeline, we would bond for those funds at that point in time. The bonding for the mill and overlay that we anticipated to be done this year was done back in 2020.
okay. So the line item 5 there, it's all taken care of financially, so that's why I don't see it, right?
You don't see 2021 projects on this schedule at all.
Okay,
This is a forward-looking project. So projects that are currently slated have all been bonded for, and with the exception of projecting some residual 2020 bond proceeds on like line 6D or 6C rather, there's no existing funding for any of those projects yet.
okay, thank you.
Sure.
Staff is also in the process of working through engineering design for the pavement replacement that is scheduled for 2022 on Oakland Avenue north of Capitol Drive. That is pavement replacement. There's no intent to replace curb or storm sewer systems that you would see in a typical road reconstruction. However, we do have replacement of the entire length of water main planned for Oakland Avenue from Capitol Drive north to the village limits, approximately Glendale Avenue, a couple 100 feet north of Glendale. We will be coming to the village board later in May to review the recommended pedestrian safety improvements that came out of the transportation and parking analysis, and then also review the consultant's analysis of the feasibility for the installation of green infrastructure in the roadway. Hubbard Park parking lot is scheduled for reconstruction in 2022. We are also currently in design engineering for that work. It is anticipated, or the design scope of work does include green infrastructure analysis, and it's expected that the final design will include green infrastructure. For our newer trustees, green infrastructure is going to be key in helping the village move toward compliance with TMDL requirements from the DNR and EPA. I say move toward compliance because it's going to be extremely difficult for the village to actually meet those guidelines for a variety of reasons. Happy to discuss that with you at another time. But I think that the takeaway here is that we do need to demonstrate that with every opportunity to install green infrastructure, we are fully evaluating it and considering those improvements.
So Leanne, in regard to TMDL with the feds and the state, is it fair to say that they can't tell how much is coming into our system? They can only look and see how much we're trying to process in environmentally friendly ways?
No, they have a fairly sophisticated modeling system, and based on watersheds and reaches, they have a good handle on what existing conditions are related to TMDLs, phosphorus, and the other contaminants of concern. So everything really is done based on those models, and then any actions the village takes are inputs into the model, and then they reduce the ultimate output, so to speak.
And so let's say we put in a parking lot that has green infrastructure. Do we get a scorecard that says, oh, you're 10% closer to your goal? Or how does
not specifically, that would be an input into the model, the wind slam model, and you would see a reduction in your TSS or phosphorus based on the type of installation that was constructed. But it is not, that's not a model that the village, like we don't have that computer model at DPW. That's a pretty sophisticated thing. So it would not be something that we could generate and say, oh, well, we did this today and we reduced our TSS by X. That would have to be, the model would have to be fully rerun by a consultant.
We wait for the DNR or the feds to tell us how much closer we're getting with each project we do?
No, it doesn't work. The DNR and EPA will at varying interval points say, all right, village, prove to us what you have done. And then we would have to retain a consultant to run that model and provide that data.
So it sounds like we prove intent with our projects, and then they'll let us know how regularly do they let us know how we're doing on our requirements, and is there a drop dead deadline on this? Like you have to be certain and compliant to a certain level by a certain time, or
yeah, it runs concurrent with our MS4 permit.
Okay.
And that's a 5-year permit cycle. But again, DNR and EPA will not tell us here's where you are. we have to retain a consultant to run the model and submit our numbers to them.
Upon their request, or is that something you just naturally do?
It's concurrent with the permit cycle.
Okay, and when is our 5-year permit up? Are we,
We just got our current permit about 18 months late. So I believe it expires in 2025.
thank you. Trustee Arndorfer and then Trustee Warren.
Thanks. I would be happy to follow up with you at greater length on this down the road, I guess, just for my own understanding. And I recognize there might not be a good answer to this question. I mean, in terms of being difficult to achieve compliance, I mean, any scale on that? I mean, like how percentage compliant would you forecast we might be, or what kind of, I guess I'm just trying to get my arms around what kind
Sure.
of gap we're talking about here.
So essentially, and I'm doing this by memory, so I'm going to be purposely vague.
Totally.
Our previous permit, the one that expired in 2020, required a 20% TSS reduction, total suspended solids reduction. And we had probably 10 years or so to achieve that. And we did, barely. Our new permit, I believe, doubles that number. So we would have to achieve a 40% reduction in total suspended solids by 2025. The realist in me will tell you that from a practical standpoint, that's impossible. We've had those conversations with DNR. Shorewood is not the only community in that position. And our staff reps at DNR understand that from an economic standpoint, that may not be feasible in the permit term. But the consistent message that they have given to us is that we have to demonstrate that we are working toward compliance. So what that means to me is that when we have opportunities to install green infrastructure or improve our operations as it relates to reducing TMDLs, then we really ought to have a serious conversation about that. Much of our demonstration can be done in conjunction with capital projects. But I would ask that you keep in mind that none of these are maintenance free. Each one of these installations will require maintenance, and that will be over and above the current efforts of our department. And then, for example, I will sidetrack only slightly here. Right now, we share a street sweeper with the Village of Whitefish Bay. Based on our land area, it takes each of us about 2 weeks to get through one cycle in each of our villages. So what that means is we sweep once per month. One of the easiest and most effective ways to significantly reduce our TSS is to increase our street sweeping. But that creates operational challenges. We can't sweep twice as much if we don't have our own sweeper, and we don't have our own sweeper. Sweeping twice as much also means twice as much labor, which means that is one person who sits in a sweeper all year and never gets out of it. We're not structured that way. We don't have that kind of staff capacity. So those are all, conversations that we have to have, and we will have. But that's the TMDL umbrella. Nothing's ever as easy as you'd like it to be.
And then before Trustee Warren, I just would think that the street sweeping though would be seasonal. I mean, there's no way we could do that year round.
That is correct. It's seasonal. We typically run, we like to wait until all salt residue is gone. So typically we would not start that before March. And then we would run it as long as the weather allowed. So, I mean, realistically, you could run it up to 9 months a year.
Okay, thank you. And Trustee Warren?
Thank you. I sent a quick note to Rebecca. I actually have to be excused tonight at 7 o'clock. So I wanted to just say thank you. Thank you, Leanne. Thank you, Mark, and welcome, Jim and Melissa. Look forward to working with you.
Thank you, Trustee Warren.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Okay, I think then we're ready. Go ahead, Leanne. You were on Hubbard Park, I think.
Yep. So that's scheduled for construction next year. It will be our goal to begin that work as early as the weather possibly permits. And we're doing that out of deference to the impact of the loss of a parking lot on wedding season at Hubbard Park Lodge. So hopefully we get in there real early and get out before spring weddings. That's the goal anyway. So street lighting box is one major component of our overall street light system. Technically, these are referred to as control cabinets. These control cabinets transfer power from the underground system from the We Energy feed to our underground streetlight system. We have a total of 9 of them located throughout the village. Currently, 4 of them are operating in excess of their design life. We have 1 of those 4 scheduled for replacement this year. I believe that contract award will be coming to you in May. The remaining 3 are located immediately adjacent to the east side of the fire station. And those in this plan are scheduled for replacement in 2025. That moves us nicely into LED. Our current system is not on a wide scale basis able to be easily converted to an LED system. It's not quite as simple as replacing a bulb in your lamp at home with an LED bulb. It could be, however, the cabling system that was designed and installed in the village many, many decades ago is, I think, what we could call at best antiquated. It does not have a ground wire, and it is a direct bury system. So essentially what that means is we have a pair of wire that are coated and insulated and then buried directly into the ground. That is not the way anyone today would build a system. And it does present some unique challenges that we have that communities with more modern systems do not face. Because of that wiring, we can't easily convert large areas of the system to LED. And so in order for us to actually replace all of the fixtures, so the cost that you see here is reflective of simply replacing fixtures. So fixture being what you see at the top of a pole with an LED model. That will create some significant challenges from a lighting design and engineering standpoint. And our very, very preliminary analysis with a lighting designer always just keeps coming back to the fact that we really need to replace the infrastructure that's currently in the ground. We do not have a cost for that. I can tell you that there'll be quite a few zeros behind it. But really some further engineering would be necessary in order for us to even obtain a general cost estimate for planning purposes.
And so is it, did you, I think in a previous conversation with you, Leanne, we had talked to, is it the conduit that needs to be upgraded?
There is no conduit
Oh, no.
currently.
So
If we installed new wiring, it would all be installed in conduit. During my tenure at DPW, when we have replaced roadway or reconstructed streets, we have replaced wire in conduit where we are working. We've done a lot of street work, in the last 15 years, but there's an awful lot more to do. So we've really only replaced a fraction of what is actually out there.
and so the old wire, you said there was no ground. I'm missing a word here.
That's correct. Typically, I'm no electrical whiz by at all. But typically you would have a pair and then you'd have a ground wire. And that ground wire would allow then any type of stray current or voltage to be safely rechanneled. That's not an electrical term, that's a Leanne term. And for whatever reason, our system was not designed nor installed that way. And it can be a significant safety issue. It's not uncommon for us to get after hours calls or pages from either the PD or the fire department because signs will be smoking. And what generally that means is that there is some sort of a fault in a wire and it has found its way to an adjacent metal sign pole. And that current then travels from the cable actually into the sign pole. And the pole will smoke or it will arc. And, clearly that's not what you want to have happening. But this is the system we work with. It's incredibly labor intensive. Spring freeze-thaw cycles are very hard on it. Water and electricity don't mix. And when things thaw and we get water into any sort of fault or any sort of nick, anything in the cable, we tend to have major areas of street light out. And there's a lot of time spent trying to determine the location of that fault. And then there's more time spent excavating to find or to get to that wire so it can be replaced.
So if we could just do the fixtures first and then do the wiring later, it looks to me like the wiring is going to be 2 to 3 million. Is this?
Yeah, it will not work that way. We cannot wholesale replace the fixtures independent of the wiring.
Okay, thank you. And what about solar? Do we just not get enough sun here? I mean, are we looking as forward?
I'm not aware of any communities in our region that use solar to power streetlight systems.
Okay, thank you. And President McCaig has a question. When would we need to budget for the engineering? I think she must be referring maybe to the lighting.
Yes. I don't know that there's a need. I can't really identify a need in the sense that this project has no connectivity to really any other projects, other than the fact that, again, it becomes a staff capacity issue. This is a large and complex problem, and given the current infrastructure schedule, Joel or I simply don't have capacity until we clear all of the combined sewer stuff off the schedule.
So that's like 2026, right?
Well, 2026 is the last phase. So 2027, I would say, would be the earliest
Okay.
with current staffing.
But as we redo roads as part of like ash and all the other things, you are putting the new conduit in as we rip up roads for other purposes, right? So we're doing we're doing a piecemeal approach at this point until we do the big project.
Correct.
And I would just like to point, President McCaig said, it sounds like we could move this out a few years and allow us to catch up. So point noted. Okay, thank you. Any more on lights? Okay, then Director Bushlick, if you'd like to move on to the Public Works Facilities.
I would be happy to. Um,
Your home, sweet
Our
home.
home, sweet home. As you know, many of you, and if you haven't had the opportunity for a tour, please let me know. I'm always happy to give them. This building was in fact designed as a public works facility. It wasn't designed for 2020 public works operations. It was designed for 1930 public works operations with horse-drawn garbage buggies. We've done a pretty good job using every available inch of space in this particular facility, but the reality of it is, it doesn't work anymore. We have equipment that we are unable to store indoors. So we have expensive investments that are weathering. An example, we don't, our newer garbage trucks do not fit in the garage, the mechanics shop. So all maintenance work on those vehicles have to be done outside in the elements. So, a January oil change means the mechanic is on the ground under the garbage truck in January outside. And there are just a lot of frankly, there's quite a bit of deferred maintenance on the buildings. And there are a lot of operational challenges working out of this particular facility. We've done a couple of reviews and evaluations in the past, 2 specifically during my tenure. No action was taken on the recommendations of either. This might be a good point for Rebecca to jump in if she'd like to talk about her current efforts related to a facility condition assessment.
So we're in process right now. We have an RFP out for facility condition assessment of both Village Hall and the Public Works facility. And so you'll be looking forward to hearing more from the Public Works Standing Committee, a review of those, selection of a firm to come in, perform those reviews, and then reporting back out in terms of how we need to plan for the future of these services. We need to lean into some of the questions, particularly in the site. Will the site function for what our service needs will be for in the future, and talk and lay out a framework of how we can proceed productively, because we're continuing to put money into a facility to keep it up for purposes of operations that we would want to think more conscientiously about as we move forward, to make sure that we're investing in the future of the service level that we're looking for. So more to come.
And so, Rebecca, does that also include the possibility of looking for a different site?
One of the studies that has been referenced in the existing RFP, one analysis did talk about whether or not we should be using this particular site, or whether we should look for an area outside of the village but near the village of which to relocate the facilities. So from my understanding, there hasn't been a village board who has leaned into those questions or worked with us in order to come to some resolution. So could be an option that's out there. I think first what we're trying to do is recalibrate on the condition of the facilities to really understand how to financially invest in the future of the facility, and then talk about how to work moving forward to provide for a facility that will meet our future needs.
Okay, and so then the 2 reports that we're referencing, just for clarity, one of them is the Public Works Facilities Master Plan from 2014, and is the second one the 2020 DPW Organizational Study?
The second is actually a facility review that occurred, I want to say in 2007 or 2010.
2010.
2010, okay.
So, yeah, so I guess technically there are 3.
And
Right, we just got done with this last one, so it wasn't even.
we're doing a fourth one. Am I right? Now we're doing a fourth one.
Well, you know, what we did in 2020 was a review of the department itself. These two that I'm referencing, the one from 2014 and 2010, were specifically geared towards the facility.
And are they online? Are all the,
Yes, and I'd be happy to recirculate those links to you.
it's probably a good idea. Thank
I
you.
will do that.
I mean, some of them are too old. All they can do is provide context, but.
The police department parking lot at the new facility is also included in your project implementation schedule. The lot in the fall, early winter, experienced some pretty significant and advanced failure. We've invested some money to address that on a short-term basis. But the underlying recommendation is that it does require reconstruction. We are, well, please keep in mind that as typically when we do work, we do the engineering work in the year prior. As I mentioned earlier, we are already several months into engineering design for Hubbard Park parking lot. I think from a maintenance perspective, it is DPW's strong recommendation that this lot be reconstructed at the earliest possible opportunity. Mark or Rebecca?
So, yeah, I thank you for the opportunity to jump in. So the lead time required, we need to decide whether we're going to do this lot. It's not functional in the way that it is. This was a component that was left out of the phasing of the reconstruction of the police department. So either you're going to use the funds that you currently have that are allocated for the police department. We came in under budget from the facility improvements. We can only spend them on the police department. So practically speaking, this is something that we will need to do. So I would strongly encourage you to consider moving forward to it to allow the parking lot to be reconstructed in 2022.
And so the residual, if I'm not mistaken, the residual bond proceeds are 75,000.
Correct.
And we need 120 to get this done.
The 120, from my understanding, am I on mute? No.
No.
Okay, is an estimate that was put together by, I believe Riley or our current engineer.
And so it would include the removal of the tank, any other remediation needed at the site, and we'd get a new concrete or an asphalt parking lot with maybe some GI.
Correct.
And possibly we could downsize the lot a little bit. It seems to me, I was just kind of doing a head count of, we need parking for about, what, 12 vehicles? I don't know how many vehicles park there now.
I'm not sure exactly how many vehicles, but keep in mind that you need to accommodate 2 shifts worth of vehicles because you'll have your incoming shift employees in the lot at the same time as your outgoing shift employees. So I don't think there would be a significant reduction in size to the lot based on parking counts.
Okay, and so it looks, so whatever happened to phase 3, phase 1, I know they bought it for 2.5 million. The renovations were about $1 million so far, correct? Is that about where we are with this?
Well, I can jump in. I mean, the story of the police facility acquisition and renovation is a entire meeting in itself. I can tell you that where we are today, we do have approximately 75,000 of residual bonded funds for the latest phase of the project that was completed under budget, and that those funds can be applied towards the the parking lot reconstruction and removal of the abandoned underground gas tank. What I think the takeaway will be here, if it's the board's will, is to authorize an engineering study to design the program so that we can get the appropriate bid documents and project scope delineated. We can discuss potential green infrastructure components and then send it out to bid per se. So I think that should be coming to the board perhaps in the next 1 or 2 meetings, if my recollection is correct.
Your recollection's correct. We went into this winter thinking that maybe we could try to get by with the lot and its condition. And it has proven to continue to be an issue. We've put down some cold patch to try to limp it along, get it to the summer season, but there's no functional way to fix it. So the only way to reconstruct and actually to reconstruct in 2022 is to start design in the GI review and improvements in May, so that we're ready.
And then where do we stand with phase 3 was supposed to be the community room? Community room, what, can someone explain to me what would be the cost and why that, like the parking lot became phase 3, but we don't have a community room in phase 3?
I can certainly try to summarize that. That was a concept that was included with some of the additional space from the original police facility design drawings. As we work through the implementation of the reconstruction and repurposing of that facility, the board never engaged in actually installing a community room. So at this point, that becomes a new purpose for the building code perspective, which is going to require additional HVAC facilities, additional lavatory and restroom facilities, and a number of other things that aren't currently in place. So my recollection is that is going to be in excess of $500,000 to put a community room in as a retrofit at this point, because the police facility has been built. It's been retrofitted. At this point, it's a whole new project. So be it police training space, police cold storage, however you want to call the current purpose, that would have to be completely redesigned for a public use, and it would be a pretty intensive project. So that was never really included in any of the phases. It was just kind of bypassed along the way as we defined the phases that pertain to implementing the police facility itself, the operational components of that. So it's kind of a hanger on its own at this point.
Thank you for that background. So should we just go around the table here, the people, because this is time sensitive. President McCaig, and then I'll ask Trustee Arndorfer because he's on the committee, and then finally Trustee Baldoff, if you have feelings about this parking lot and the police funding for this police department initiative. President McCaig, do we have audio of you yet?
I don't think so.
Oh, well, if you want to text me your sentiments. No, okay. Trustee Arndorfer, funding for the police department here?
Yeah, I mean, I think clearly the parking lot needs work. I guess I just would want more information regarding the proposed community room or what that would entail. And I guess, you know, I don't need to go deep and any deeper than we already have into the backstory there, but I guess a fuller understanding of how we got to where we are on that would be helpful at some point, but certainly on the parking lot.
Okay, thank you. And Trustee Baldoff, would you like to weigh in?
I don't have anything to add beyond what Trustee Arndorfer said. More information would be helpful.
Okay, thank you. I'll weigh in favor of using, that we should move forward with the engineering too for this year so that we can complete this thing in 2022. And, I hope that we, keep in mind green infrastructure and the possibility of electric vehicles, plugging them in. I know this is a parking lot and you typically, I think, will plug them in indoors. We're early in on this. And maybe we can look later at the community room because it is such a huge expense. I will put in my personal pitch again for a bike rack in front of the police station. I think it would be a great addition, and I think if we can do something in that regard now, it would send a message to the public and be the right kind of pedestrian-friendly thing that we'd like to see in front of the building. I'm just going to read now. I think I see something from President McKay. She looks forward to considering it on May 3rd. I think she's referring to this, the police department parking lot initiative. So would you like a vote on this at this point?
We're not scheduled. Thank you, Trustee
Oh,
Stokes.
that's right. Yeah.
We're
No,
not scheduled
okay.
for any action this evening, but this matter will be brought back before you on May 3rd.
Okay, so you have 3 trustees weighing in on moving forward with a parking lot informally,
Thank you.
right? Okay. And then Village Center HVAC.
Sure. So the mechanicals for the Village Center, the heating, ventilating, and air conditioning, and the future facilities Village Hall, which is listed as your next item, both of those will be more fully addressed following the receipt of the facilities condition assessment report.
And may I ask, what's the ETA on that facilities assessment?
We're hoping to receive RFPs in May, evaluate them and solidify the vendor in June. And then we'll see what timetable that's identified from the vendor, but I anticipate that to be completed in fall of this year.
So the information will be available for most of the budget process in like October, November?
I don't know if it will be completed by that time. However, I would anticipate that any recommendations coming forth would potentially be incorporated in next year's long-range plan.
Okay, thank you. Future facilities, Village Hall.
Same.
Okay.
Okay.
Is it my understanding that some of the HVAC for the Village Center, does some of that come from the grant that the library got or no?
Just to follow up on the HVAC, earlier this year in January, the village submitted an energy grant to see if we could get the HVAC specifically for Village Center covered. We were not successful with that grant, but it is a topic that will be coming back for consideration during budget, and we're waiting also to see what the advisement is with regards to ARP plan or ARP funding to see what qualifies and does not qualify, because that may be an area that the village chooses to look at to make some investments.
Can you help me with ARP?
The American Recovery Act or program, the funds that are coming out.
Right. Okay, and so then are we ready for water relay? I don't want to rush.
I'm ready.
Okay.
Are you ready?
Let's do it.
All right. So fall backward to our earlier conversation about how we schedule things around identified road reconstruction projects, because that context is valuable for this discussion. We do our major water relay projects, water relay being the term for the replacement of water main, in even calendar years. Once a road reconstruction project area is identified, we then do a condition assessment of the utilities in those locations. Water main is to this point has been replaced based on those condition assessments and a repair or break history. If a segment of water main has had no issues, no past repairs or breaks recorded, we typically to this point have not replaced it. In even calendar years, we work to replace water main that we know is a strong candidate for replacement based on its condition or break history. But in segments that we know will not be identified as part of future road reconstruction programs. For example, in 2021, our main relay replacement is the 38 and 3900 blocks of Frederick Avenue. So that runs from Beverly north to Capitol Drive on the east side of the Village Hall and Library complex. That roadway was built in 2002 and is not currently on any of our replacement schedules. But the water main does need attention. So that will be replaced, and then the road surface over the top will be restored with an entirely new asphalt overlay. So the road will essentially look new, at least for a while. We, at a point in the near future, will need to have a larger conversation about how we continue with replacement of our water main. Currently, when we replace main, we replace what is referred to as the municipal portion of the service. That's the portion of the water line that runs from the main, typically to somewhere in the sidewalk area. That portion is owned and maintained by the Village of Shorewood. From that point, the point of what is typically referred to as the curb stop, you see it as a silver disc that sometimes is painted blue. That's the location of the curb stop. From that point into the home, the water line is privately owned and maintained. When we replace our mains, we also replace the existing municipal services with copper. Most of our private line infrastructure is lead. None of our water mains are lead. Currently, we give residents or property owners the option to replace their portion of the service under our contract. Results on that have been mixed. It really depends on the area we are working in. We have 24 services in this project. To date, I've had conversations with 3 property owners who are interested in replacing their private portion of the service. I think that it is highly likely with the lead and copper rule that will become law in 2024, that we will get to a point where that is no longer a voluntary effort, that it will be required. And so that will be one line of conversation that the village will need to have. A second line will be how quickly we want to address the issue of lead service lines. I think you see in here, Public Service has a goal, Public Service Commission has a goal that we should be replacing 1.5% to 2% of all of our water mains annually. In the last 10 years, not quite 10 years, we've replaced about 4%. So we are not meeting the benchmarks set by the Public Service Commission.
Okay, I would interrupt you briefly. I think Trustee Arndorfer has a question.
Yeah, just really quick question. I think I know the answer. Is there ever any water main work done in connection with alley repair, or are those just two wholly disconnected pieces?
We do not, they're disconnected in the sense that there are no water main in our alleys.
Okay.
There's no water main in our alleys. It all runs within the road
Got it.
right of way.
Thank you.
And
Sure.
then the question is, if we think we get a lot of pushback from sidewalk assessments, what will it be like if we go with a mandatory lead replacement for the water connection?
Yeah, it's going to be a difficult conversation. I think it is certainly an involved conversation for another evening, but keep in mind that there are financing vehicles that would be available to the village that are not now available because we operate with a voluntary program. There are certain funding mechanisms available through the water utility if it is mandatory. If the village had an
Are there-
ordinance,
Are there communities that are mandating this?
yes, there are several. And like I said, by 2024, it's very likely that we will not have that choice or that option.
And so then if that happens, it would become like the sidewalks. It would be every time we're in your neighborhood doing this work and we're working on water mains, then it will be your time and you will not have a choice. Is that how it would work?
Essentially, that is how I envision that it would work. Yeah.
Okay. Anything else from anyone on the water relay projects? Or Leanne, if you had more?
No, I think, like I said, we'll be having a conversation related to the lead and copper rule and how that is operationally going to impact the Shorewood water utility.
Okay, thank
So,
you. Well,
yay, stay tuned for that.
You're the new water meters first, right?
Yeah, one problem at a time, please. Related, keeping on the theme with our water infrastructure system, we are a wholesale customer of Milwaukee Waterworks. We have 2 locations where we connect to their system, and that water enters the Shorewood distribution system. Both of those are housed in subsurface structures with master meters that measure the volume of water that comes in, and Milwaukee uses that to build the village. We replaced the first of those structures last year. The second of those structures, located near the intersection of Oakland Avenue, doesn't meet current safety requirements and also needs to be replaced. We are proposing in this schedule that structure be relocated out of the roadway and into somewhere within the Humboldt Park area, most likely, and replace it with a modern structure. And right now we're looking at that is earmarked for 2025.
Okay, thank you. Any questions on the water, the vault location? Nope.
The water meter replacement program is probably our biggest focus this year from a department and a utility standpoint. Beginning in August, we will be entering every residential structure in the village and most commercial structures to replace the existing meters with new meters, and then a modern reading system. That reading system is referred to as AMI, and that will give us the capability to wirelessly collect usage data and bill from that data. We will no longer have to, one of our staff will no longer have to walk to each home to measure, to take that meter reading, measuring that consumption. So in terms of accuracy, efficiencies, just a host of benefits that both the consumers and the utility from an efficiency standpoint will gain from this project. This is titled Southeast Area Road Resurfacing, also commonly called mill and overlay. The yellow areas are our program areas for 2021. You recall we have already discussed South Oakland Avenue. The other portion of the project is the streets in the far southeast area of the village, what we tend to call the curved streets. Like the work plan for South Oakland, this is intended to be temporary in nature. It allows us to get in and replace some pretty awful pavement conditions, and gives us some breathing room while we complete all phases of the southeast area sewer improvements and Lake Drive. And then eventually we will return to the area and fully reconstruct those roadways, and very likely at that time also address water main and other utility needs.
Leanne, I have a question. So Edgewood is really, really bad. And I noticed it's not on this page, and on 16, it's only partially, it's in pink, only goes past, I'm sorry, my eyes, I can't read that type. So what is the plan for making Edgewood smooth?
That has to be a coordinated and joint effort with the city of Milwaukee. The village boundary, the municipal boundary is the center line of Edgewood. From a practical standpoint, we really can't do anything on a standalone basis. When the Edgewood near surface collector was first envisioned, MMSD was looking at a project area that was quite a bit larger than it is today. And when first envisioned, it was also thought that much of that work would be open cut, that there would be an excavation of the roadway. Since that time, things have changed quite a bit. The actual project area will not extend east of Maryland Avenue, and all work done as a part of that project will actually be tunneled. So there will be very little excavating and open cut. Early on, our staff was working with City of Milwaukee staff to do road restoration in conjunction with that project. Now that there is no or very little excavation, and what excavation is occurring is entirely within Shorewood Village limits. There's some question as to Milwaukee's interest or ability to participate. I have reached out to our staff contacts there that we had been working with in the early iterations. I have not received a response to my question as to whether they are still planning to do a road resurfacing in 2023 following completion of the following completion of the Edgewood project with MMSD.
And so resurface, is that, you're not talking reconstruct, though it's mill and overlay?
Correct. It would be grinding off the top surface of the current concrete roadway, and then putting an asphalt driving surface. That was the city staffers proposal, if you will. Our initial proposal was a full reconstruction of the concrete roadway. They countered that proposal, we'll just say.
Yeah. Okay, so maybe 2023.
Maybe.
Would we
Like I said,
split the cost?
I'm hopeful that we can come up with some sort of plan of attack at a staff level. If that does not appear to be the case, then I think perhaps that conversation needs to happen at a different level.
And so that would be split the cost?
I would assume so. We didn't get to that point, but we own half the roadway, they own the other half. That seems a logical point.
And the curbs and gutters would stay. So it just, if we're looking at the.
Correct.
Okay.
Well, yeah, I mean, based on their most recent proposal, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so this is the big guy. We have for literally decades been working to address issues with sewer surcharging in the combined sewer service area. We believe that we, after much review and many smaller attempts at addressing these basement backup risks, we are now in the final stages of preliminary design, and have identified what we believe to be a solution, in the sense that it's an answer, not a solution in the sense that it will absolutely positively guarantee nothing ever happens again. But the village contracted with Strand Associates, who also happens to be our village engineer, to develop a design to reduce and mitigate the risk of basement backups in the combined sewer service area. That report will be presented to the village board in July. And at that time, the consultant will identify a route and location of the proposed improvements. It is important to note that without the work or the project that MMSD will begin later this year and will continue construction through 2022 and into 2023, the solution being proposed to the board would be exponentially larger, both in scope and in cost. Originally, MMSD envisioned that Edgewood project to be in the neighborhood of $7 million. The most recent cost estimate that I saw doubled the value of that project. That is money and investment to provide an increased level of service to combined sewer service area residents in both Shorewood and the city of Milwaukee. And it is absolutely the backbone and framework of the Southeast area improvements that we have scheduled in 2023, 2024, and 2026. The short answer is, without the MMSD work, we would be looking at a very, very different approach that would be significantly more impactful to our residents, to our infrastructure, and it would be significantly more expensive. So MMSD has been a great partner in this process. As a part of the combined sewer area improvements that we have scheduled, we will be looking at road reconstruction in the vast majority of areas where we place new sewer pipe in the ground. It is also staff's recommendation that we replace all water main in any excavated street. And obviously all all private or municipally owned service segments related to that water main. Like all of our other projects, we will be looking at ash removal and replacement, and then impacted storm, any type of storm sewer work, though in this particular case that would likely be limited to street inlets, as this is a combined sewer area. It should be noted that all of this will be very impactful, both to residents in the short term, and certainly in the long term, to both the use of their property and hopefully potentially their property values. It's going to be a very intense construction period and project, and it'll be intense for the residents and staff, and and this particular project is what we've talked about through the whole of our review this evening. We very much expect these to be basically the kind of our really sole focus while they are under construction. And that really will limit our ability to do any type of other infrastructure improvements.
Leanne, I had one question about, in the second paragraph there, it says the initial phase for the MMSD, that's the little mini deep tunnel, right?
Yes, that's
Begins
correct.
late 2021, goes through 2023.
Correct.
Shorewood's 3 phases starts in 2023. Phase 2 is in, should that be 2024 or
Yes.
5?
Yep, that's a typo. That should be in 2024.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Sure. So this, as noted, is a conceptual drawing. This is a route or a phasing that was based on a very early conceptual design report. The final phase will be, as I mentioned, presented to you in July. I'll give you one little sneak peek and hint. Downer figures heavily into that from what I have seen to date. So this may look a fair amount different than it does right here.
And that's because we're awaiting engineering information.
We have really what we've been waiting for is some good rainfall modeling data. Essentially, the computer model work was done probably late last fall. And the engineer was really hoping for a good fall rain and then some really good spring rains, so we could put even more data into that model. And it really, thus far, you know, when you want it to rain, it doesn't, right? So I think his intent is to wrap up and pull those rainfall monitors at the end of May and spend much of the month of June finishing, fine tuning the model and then the report. And right now we are scheduled to come to you at the first meeting of July.
Okay, thank you.
Lake Drive is currently scheduled for reconstruction by the Wisconsin Department of Transportation in 2026. This is subject to a cost share agreement. At this point, you know, being this far out, we really don't have any good cost estimates or data. They're approaching 30% design. Typically, you don't get good numbers at that level of design. But as a placeholder, I believe we have included $1 million in the long-range financial plan to cover any part of the village's cost share of pavement, and then any lighting replacement or upgrades would be fully at the village's expense, as would any utilities. And we are scheduling the replacement of water main on Lake Drive for the full length of the segment from Edgewood to Kensington. And that would also include all of the service, the municipal portion of the service adjacent to that main segment. And the third phase of the combined area sewer improvements does include relay of combined sewer pipe on Lake Drive south of Capitol Drive. So we will be, there will be some pretty mighty coordination involved with our engineering team and the state to make sure that we can work all of these items into that singular project.
Leanne, do you know, in a situation like that, would they make Lake Drive, would they make it down to one lane in each direction, or would they try a detour, or what would they do?
I
It's a
think
long ways away.
it's a long ways away. I mean, I think typically when the state does connecting highways, they do try to keep traffic moving through the corridor when that's possible. I think with the utility work that we are doing, I think that is going to be an incredible challenge to keep traffic moving in both directions for each day of the project. But that we're just not there yet. That remains to be seen. But I think it's certainly a possibility that we may have some short-term detours as we work through some of that utility upgrade.
And I know in Rebecca's memo last Friday, there was some information on I-43. I'm just hoping these aren't at the same time. That I-43 project, I mean, I can just see some of that traffic coming our way. Trustee Arndorfer?
Thank you. Yeah, just to clarify, is there going to be wiring work factored into the three projects on this page as well as the sewer work?
You mean replacement of streetlight cabling?
Yeah.
Yes, definitely. Yep.
So all of Lake Drive could have new conduit.
All of Lake Drive will have entirely new streetlight cabling. Yes.
On both sides.
Yes. Well,
I just got a complaint from a resident this week about the crossing at Lake and Capitol, that it wasn't properly lit. So.
Oh, well, I will say it's lit according to WISDOT specifications. So, but yes, there will be a full lighting study as a part of the engineering work for that project.
Thank you.
Sure.
Okay, so I guess I would just like to recap a little bit. We did provide some direction. If you were done, Leanne, I'm sorry.
Oh, no, thank you. Please go ahead.
And unless Director Emanuelson had anything further to.
Actually, I did have
Okay.
one item I would ask for guidance from the committee on, and that relates to the concept of these LED street lighting. It seems apparent to me that we're just not ready to move forward on that project, given the complexities involved in the evaluation of the electrical system, plus the magnitude of all the other projects that kind of got fit in while this just slowly crept along the schedule. If the committee agrees, I'd ask that they direct staff to move that project and quite honestly, the engineering study of that project to 2027. And then once that's completed, any future implementation would be brought to the board for consideration at that point.
Okay, thank you. Let's go around the table. Trustee Arndorfer, and then Trustee Baldoff, and President McCaig, if you would like to just text me. I would concur with this. I think the street lights are really bad, and I'd like to see something happen sooner, but I think this is the prudent way to go. Trustee Arndorfer?
Agree.
Trustee Baldoff?
Agree as well.
And I'm going to check here. Trustee McCaig has got a thumbs up. Okay, so you have direction from us, and understanding that Trustee Baldoff is not a committee member, but we appreciate her input. So we have Trustee Arndorfer and I weighing in as committee members, and the other two as trustees.
Thank you very much.
Mhm.
Well, I guess unless there's any wrap-up questions, this is really the first meeting. The objective of this meeting historically has yielded a lot of debate on project schedule and project timing. But as we've talked about, we've got some pretty large and substantial and interwoven project schedules here that really don't accommodate at this point a lot of maneuvering as far as strategic implementation. So I know that there is a provisional meeting to do additional follow-up scheduled. I don't know what the protocol is, if that meeting is or is not required. I get a sense from participation tonight that we've had a good review, and I have not heard a lot of indications that there's a desire to restructure our strategic plan here in the next 5 years for those projects that we've got set up. And that we're happy with that outcome. We're hopeful that we reflect the needs of the community on our schedules and the projects that we're trying to accomplish, given the limitations of various factors. So I'd like to thank everybody for their time tonight, and for those who participated in the preview to this, thank you for that time as well. Trustee Stokbrand, any comments or?
Yeah, I just wanted to recap here on this. So we are meeting today, April 26th. Another one on the calendar is Monday, May 24th, to go over this one more time. But at that point, we won't have the third date was June 14th, but we still won't have that July information available then yet either. So I guess the question is, with Trustee Arndorfer and myself as committee members, do we feel a need to have that Tuesday, June 14th meeting? Is that correct, Manager Ewald, or can we just do Monday, the 24th?
Correct.
I would say regarding the third item that was outlined here about the special assessments, removing them from the sidewalk program, I would agree with Trustee Warren that a little more context would be good, because it would be it'd be a sea change for us in terms of funding a public works project. That I guess he was asking for, other communities or any more information you could have for us at the Monday, May 24th meeting about that. And then we could perhaps provide or will we provide direction as a full board on that probably, huh? We probably want to take a committee vote on that though, in May.
Yep,
Yeah.
we'd be happy to gather that information. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Then Trustee Arndorfer, I don't know, how do you feel about just wrapping this up on May 24th and eliminating the June 14th meeting? I feel like we've done a pretty good job tonight myself.
Yeah, I'm aligned with that. I mean, I think a lot of these projects have been on the docket for some time, right? I mean, certainly the sewer project, which is the biggest ticket right here. So yeah, I would agree. I mean, I think we can get it locked down by May 24th.
And if I might interject as well, at the will of the committee and the body of a whole, the focus at that meeting is going to be in the fiscal analysis schedules of the long range plan. The intent is not to review. This is now the building block for that. So the intent is not to review all this again. It's to review the outcomes that come with implementing the project schedule that's been described. So.
Okay, thank you. And it did look like, I believe Trustee Ursink has also met with you, with staff about the budget, and I may have missed someone else. So Trustee Baldoff also did. So I feel like we're well informed, and thank you staff for that. And so I think that we don't need a motion or anything to just decide, we will do Monday, May 24th, but we feel there's no need to do Tuesday, June 14th. Is that correct? And we'll just do that by consensus if that meets the needs of everybody. Okay. All right. Thank you, everyone. I believe then if there's nothing further, I would entertain a motion to adjourn. You can.
Seconded.
Moved by President McCaig, seconded by Trustee Arndorfer. All in favor? Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you, everybody.
Have a good night.